Bible similes. Any consideration of Christian education always involves Christian people. Their character, motivation, goals, and abilities definitely shape the product. But everybody knows that the Bible should also play a significant role as well. If the Bible is God's Word, the self-disclosure of a loving God who's interested in every aspect of our lives, it has to be relevant for education. However, the problem of describing its role is not easy, and many Christians have come up with very different ideas. Because we often think in terms of pictures or analogies, it's useful to explore the kind of mental pictures that we have of the Bible. We may be able to recognize ways that we need to adjust our assumptions about the Bible's role. So, how would you describe the Bible? Is it a medicine chest? Is it like a refrigerator, a crystal ball, a funnel, a light? All analogies are deficient in some way, but I want to tell you about a couple of similes that I thought of and discarded. A common misconception is that the Bible is the missing ingredient that's needed to fill the gaps in the educational puzzle. We could discuss the size of the gaps, but the general outline seems complete with only a few additional pieces needed. I enjoy making picture puzzles, but it's very aggravating to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle and find at the end that even one or two pieces are missing. You can tell what the picture looks like, but everyone's unsatisfied until the missing pieces are found. The Bible can be treated like the missing piece that will fit into the complex tapestry of education along with the various curricular pieces. But the Bible doesn't fit in any man-made arrangement of the pieces. It isn't just a round peg in a square hole. Its color, shape, size, and thickness, everything about it seems to suggest that it comes either from an entirely different puzzle or it has an entirely different function. You have a problem, I have a Bible verse. Of course, the Bible isn't really needed except when things go wrong. But there are deficiencies, even if I think the Bible is a missing glue that'll hold the other pieces of the educational puzzle together. The ingredient that holds the various intricate and often almost unrecognizable pieces together, producing an object of form and substance with meaning, is important. This idea does recognize the Bible has a different function than the other parts of the puzzle, but may not communicate the centrality of the Scriptures. The glue doesn't shape the model. You don't consult the glue when you want to know how everything is supposed to go together. So we better treat the Bible differently than glue to fix problems. I can envision the Bible as the paint that makes the colorless, meaningless parts of the educational model come alive. So the final result's a many splendored thing instead of a functional but uninteresting product. But the Bible is not just to cover the surface. It should impregnate every aspect of the material. My initial attempts to bring the Bible into the classroom involved sprinkling Bible verses in my lessons, like salt. Some lessons had more verses than others, but the idea was to make the lessons tasty and preserve the truth. However, it was very hard to find Bible verses for some lessons, and often the verses didn't seem to belong. I realized the problem isn't figuring out how to add the Bible to the educational process, but rather how to see the science and mathematics that I taught as part of the picture that God has revealed of His purposes and activities. I thought some similes were better than others. Trying to put together an educational system while ignoring the Bible is like building a house without blueprints using a random selection of samples from a building supply company. The Bible often uses the analogy of building, so thinking of the Bible as a blueprint can be helpful. Only when we have a grasp of what God's framework looks like can we make any meaningful attempt to integrate such important pieces as science and mathematics, for instance. If we don't study the plans carefully, we may find such important items as the toilet in the middle of the living room, the bathtub under the dining room table, and the stove on top of the beds. Chaos is inevitable without biblical integration, but it's not the Bible that needs to find its place, but education, the curriculum, the subjects, and all the people involved, including parents, students, and teachers. Maybe an analogy would help explain how the integration of every aspect of life into a Christian framework or blueprint really transforms our thinking. Imagine, if you would, that you find the contents of a prefabricated building package in a field outside your town. All the pieces are there to build something, but you discover there are no plans with the materials. The bricks, pipes, boards, glass, screws, etc. somewhere scattered as the materials have been laying on the ground for some time, but it isn't at all clear what you're supposed to do with everything. Because it's in the country, and there are a lot of horses and cows in the country, and there's a can of red stuff that looks like paint, and the labels have washed off long ago, you decide that the materials are supposed to make a barn. You start by trying to find out what the dimensions are supposed to be. What kind of footings are to be prepared? The ground's soft, after all, excellent for agriculture, but work proceeds very slowly because everyone argues about how the various pieces should go together. What are the dimensions? How high should the structure be? And then, in the midst of all the confusion, someone finds a bundle of gold and silver sheets wrapped in plastic in the midst of the pile. Things get really excited. Obvious somebody thought cows and horses were important, for they wanted to decorate the barn in a spectacular way. Others argue that the gold and silver are there to pay for more materials to make the barn bigger. Some think that the noble metals are to be used in the feed troughs to prevent contamination of the food supply. And so the discovery of the gold and silver causes more conflict than solving problems. However, one of the workers gets curious about the bundle and begins to look closely at the sheets that have surrounded the gold and silver, and discovers that they have all kinds of writing on them. In fact, they are the plans for the building. When they have read carefully, it's obvious they're not the plans for a barn, but a cathedral. Some argue that seeing so much work has been done on the barn, you might as well continue. Others don't want to disappoint the cows, but a few want to tear down the work that's been done and start over to make the building that was intended. The old has to be removed because the plans reveal that the solid rock bluff in the corner of the field that was useless for a barn is supposed to be the very foundation of the building. The gold and silver weren't there to make a beautiful barn or even rust-proof troughs, but to glorify the God of all the earth. We must be sure that we start considering the matter of biblical integration, that we don't allow the world's philosophy or even our own natural tendencies to guide the process. We must instead build on the foundation that has already been laid, Jesus Christ, and allow the Scriptures, the living Word of Almighty God, to direct everything that we build on that foundation. Only in this way will we produce anything of lasting eternal value in our personal lives, in our families, in our churches, and in our schools. We must therefore begin by studying the biblical framework of reality. We need to know the broad outlines of the plan God has revealed to us so that we can fit together the pieces for which we are responsible, so that we can do it with confidence and great joy. Jesus, the master architect, is building his church, and even though we may never have the opportunity to see more than a small corner of it, we can be sure that all that we do is integrated into his plan, and he has promised to reward every faithful servant that builds for his glory. There are limitations to thinking that the Bible is like a blueprint. I often found that I wished the Bible had more information about some specific questions that were facing me. Who should I marry? What vocation should I pursue? Where should I live? How should I make a decision in this particular case? Those details did not seem to be included in the blueprint, even though it gave directions for the overall framework of my life. As a scientist, I thought that the Bible is like oxygen. Where do you find oxygen in a room? It turns out it's pretty much everywhere. It's in the air you breathe. It's in the materials that make up the walls of the room. It's almost impossible to get it out of anything. In fact, most of chemistry involves trying to remove oxygen from the common materials that we find that include oxygen so that we can recombine things and make them pure and without oxygen. If the Bible's like oxygen, having a Bible room in the school doesn't really make sense any more than having a oxygen room would. Sometimes we do treat the Bible as a classroom, as a place where you go to get a deep breath of good biblical air and then run off to do the rest of life as long as you can with the inspiration that you've received. But that doesn't really make long-term sense. The Bible needs to be part of everything and every part. It isn't something that's added to, it's something that is there from the very beginning and cannot be removed. Perhaps the best simile that I discovered was that the Bible is like an unfinished play. Imagine with me that someone discovered a handwritten copy of a completely unknown Shakespearean play. But it wasn't complete. Only the first acts were available. Would it be valuable? Of course. It would be worth millions at an auction. But the purpose of a play is not to preserve it as an interesting historical document. Plays are to be performed. But how do you perform a play that isn't complete? How does it end? Experienced actors who are familiar with the Shakespearean repertoire would study the unfinished play, think about how Shakespeare himself might have completed it if he'd had time, and they would then perform the play, trying their very best to be consistent with what had been written. Different groups at different times would inevitably have different conclusions about the possible ways to conclude the play. But a discussion of their value and their faithfulness to the original would be centered in what had been revealed, so that even the differences could be considered and compared to what had been said. The Bible may not have all of the answers that we would like about how to respond faithfully and obediently in our world at this time, but it does have many examples from the past that will guide and shape our lives today if we study them and commit ourselves to faithfully follow what it does say. For more resources for Christ-centered education, please please visit the Transforming Teachers website.